Welcome to Scout's Eye, presented by Sports Info Solutions. Here's your host, Jeff Dean.
Hey, welcome to Scout's Eye. I'm your host, Jeff Dean. My coworker, Jordan Edwards, is joining me today. And then we also have a couple of special guests. We have Ian Valentino and Ian Cummings, who both specialize in NFL draft and the NFL-related content. So today we're going to be talking about NFL prospects, some we like, some we don't like as much, and then kind of see how they may fit into our NFL draft that's approaching us next week. So we'll just get right into it. So the first player we want to talk about is Troy Fautanu. And so Ian Valentino and Jordan Edwards will discuss what they think as a prospect. So Ian Valentino is an NFL and NFL draft analyst for the 33rd team in A-to-Z Sports. He cut his teeth in the scouting world working for Eric Galko at Optimum Scouting a decade ago. Since then, he's published several NFL draft guides and built the NFL draft vertical at Pro Football Network. You can follow him at Twitter at NFL Draft Study. So, Ian, what do you think of Troy Fautanu?
Yeah, I'm a really big fan. I had the pleasure of watching the Pac-12 this season when I was with TFN, and so Washington was one of my key teams each and every week. And it was funny because watching him in the preseason, it's like, okay, like you can see he's got the tools, he looks good, and like when I got the preseason list from actually Galco sent it over to us to see what scouts had thought they could bless to grades. I had seen a lot of projections for Catano, and we kind of saw this directly at the end of the season where a lot of folks were projecting him inside the guard, and I thought that was a little bit surprising. I kind of assumed, all right, maybe it's his measurements, maybe he doesn't have the arm length, because you watch the guy in the field and he plays just like a tackle should play. He understands space. He's very well balanced. He's strong. He's able to play in pass pro extremely effectively. He's very comfortable in his kickback. I think that he's able, you could see why you'd be able to move him into guard because a lot of those things transfer very easily. He's got so much power. He can move downhill while he moves in space really, really well for his build. And you wouldn't expect him to weigh probably what he does just based off of that. But he plays within himself. And I think his mastery of his body is why I would definitely project him as a left tackle first and foremost, right? Like there's no reason to move him to inside the guard unless if you're one of these teams that just absolutely need a guard and you're just walking into things saying, hey, we just don't need a tackle, or maybe you'll be like the backup option at tackle. And we've seen that over the last couple of years with these kind of versatile type of prospects, where the team they drafted him, then we're going to move him around. We saw last year, Peter Skoronski to the Titans. And so I think the profile is even better because he's got the natural arm length. He's got a little bit more outlet to him. But for him, the way he can control a defender, the way he reacts to defenders is so natural. He's someone that's not going to panic. He's going to play within himself. And I think that that's a big part of his identity and really this tackle class in general. Like when you talk about a lot of these guys, they know themselves. And I think that's such a great strength to have. And it's a big telling difference to guys that get to the next level and struggle is when they are confident in that first punch, when they're confident in their ability to recover and identify stunts that are coming, and then be able to rely on their athleticism to recover when they need to. That's the moment where guys that don't know that, guys that don't have that physical ability, we can't assume that every player has the same physical abilities, right? So like when the guys like this have high level traits across the board, what separates them from being someone like that busts out of the league or has to move inside the guard or becomes a backup, those guys generally panic. And whether it's a justified panic or not, because they have the traits or don't have the traits, the guys that have the traits and still panic, they don't play within themselves, right? They feel the pressure. They feel that they can't do what they need to do, even if they actually can. And I think that's my favorite part of Fautanu is that, yes, great in the run game. Yes, I want to get him on the screens as much as possible. I want him to bulldoze and landmark at the next stage as much as possible. I can trust him on an island at left tackle without throwing a guy over there to chip too often, right? I do think that against speed rushers, every left tackle in the NFL is going to be prone to some of these speed rushers. The power, the speed to power guys. Yeah, okay, Myles Garrett. Okay, yeah, he's probably going to need help against Myles Garrett. TJ Watt. Okay, it's not a condemnation against this guy. Like, he's still going to be a good player. But I think that he's going to be effective. He has a high floor. He's going to play right away. He's going to be able to be a high-level competent player. And so I think we're starting to see his value reflect that in recent discussions, right? Like we're starting to see him really, I think, be probably like a top 22 type of lock type of player. And it's because of that high floor skill set and understanding. There's very little in my opinion that he's going to have to work on to become at least an average or better starter.
I like that.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's Ian kind of said all of it there. I mean, there's a lot really to like about Patano. I wrote him up as a guard on our site for the 33rd team. However, he's one of my favorite players in the draft. I could realistically see him being a solid starting level player just at about every position on the offensive line. He's somebody that we did a deep dive on over the last year with some other stuff that we do here at SIS. And during one or two of the first games that we watched, I was thought this guy kind of looks like a center. He never really played center at all or anything like that, but he just kind of has that kind of aesthetic to him. He's got the athleticism, the quickness with his hands, the twitch kind of in his throughout his whole body. Like, the lower body, the upper body, it's kind of all, it mirrors and matches well to like, this consistency throughout his whole base and everything. So there was one thing I feel like he could play a little bit more in a tighter area. I do like some of the things that I think Washington was asking him to do, which can make it look like he was playing at a worse spot, living on an island as a left tackle, where I think he could have been a little over aggressive with some of his pass sets and some of the things that Washington was asking our offensive line to do. Nobody else in college asked them to do with kind of their 5-man protections. And so I think that's something that can get cleaned up. Sure, I think he can definitely live on the outside as a tackle. I think being in that little tighter area could be just as a guard in general. But this is somebody I will draft, and I really feel comfortable playing him at any spot in that case. So really, I really agree on all fronts with what Ian said there.
I personally, everything I've seen about him has just been awesome. He's just a fun player to watch. And he's got one of the best highlight tapes for offensive linemen, I think, coming to this year's draft. So
Yeah.
It's exciting to see the NFL world get ready for him. Okay, but moving on the other side of the ball now, there's a lot of prospects on that side that have kind of had the good. However, I don't think have always quite played up to their total potential coming to this draft class. I think one of those players that some people are more split on is Michael Hall. So we're going to have Ian Cummings and Jordan talk about him for a second. But Ian Cummings is an NFL draft analyst for Pro Football Network. He graduated from Grand Valley State University in the summer of 2022 with a marketing degree and began his writing career at Rigo's Rag, Van Syden's Washington Commanders site in 2017. You can follow him on Twitter at IC_draft. So, Ian, what do you think about Michael Hall?
Yeah, I like the upside a lot for sure. I think that's one of the first things that stands out on his tape and with his physical profile too. 6'3", 290, 33.5-inch arms. He's got an over 81-inch wingspan as well. So a lot of the physical tools that you want for a defensive tackle. For me specifically, one thing that I always take note of when I see it is that natural leverage proportional length combination, right? Because you can play with more natural pad level. You can also get inside your opponent's frame more easily. That's something that I see with Troy Fautanu as well on the offensive side, right? So it's something that when you see it, you take note because it can help you use that actionable combination more often. And I think as a pass rusher specifically, that's where his traits really show up. And it's interesting because he didn't have a ton of raw production at the collegiate level in terms of sacks and tackles for loss, right? So you don't always see it on the surface, but you watch the tape and you see the explosiveness, the lateral agility, the agility and bend to levy spin moves on counters and inside moves. He's got all of that movement freedom for that size, and he can leverage that hip rotation into really impressive torque and power at the contact point too to win one-on-one pass rushing phase. So I think we saw that under the spotlight at the Senior Bowl in Mobile, Alabama, right? When he was in those one-on-one reps, he was a nightmare to deal with because that explosion, that lateral agility, that natural leverage where he can get underneath your anchors and then he can forklift up with that power and that rotational freedom. So there's a lot to work with on the pass rushing side from the upside perspective, right? But I think where the polarizing aspect of his evaluation comes is run defense. And I don't think he's a liability there, but I do think the over aggressive, explosive tendencies that he has, sometimes he'll try to penetrate gaps and he'll wash himself out of plays, right? And I also think there are times where he can be more controlled, more balanced when attempting the one gap in run defense too. So I think you see that on film where, if you're looking for a guy at 6'3", 290 as well, he can fill out his frame a little bit more, but I don't think it's that much of a leverage mass issue. I think it's more of a discipline issue in run defense where, if you're too hasty getting upfield, you're playing right into the offensive run scheme look, and then you're just washing yourself upfield and flushing out of lanes that running backs can cut back into. So I think for Michael Hall, it's a dichotomy between his pass rushing utility and his run defense utility. If you want a guy who, ideally, I think with his frame, I'd prefer him to be an odd and hybrid fronts because that way he has a nose tackle to play off of who can encumber those double teams and combo blocks and allow him to go one one-on-one every down, right? I think in that kind of scheme as an attacking, gap penetrating defensive lineman, one gap, he's got a ton of upside for sure. But the run defense utility on day one, that's the question with him. And if you're an NFL defensive line coach, you're looking at that frame, like I can get him to 300 pounds. If I can teach him to be more disciplined and, stack and shed, because he's got the natural leverage and the length to do that. If I can teach him to do that, that 2-down upside is very appealing, but it's still a question with him. We don't know if he's going to get to that level, right? So I think pass rushing catalyst on day 2, I like him a lot. That's kind of my valuation for him. I think he's a top 64 prospect for me. He's my DT4 behind Johnny Newton, Byron Murphy the second, and then I got Ruke Aruro from Clemson in that range too. But I really like the upside with Hall. I think you put him in a team like the Texans, right? They got Foley Fatukasi at nose tackle. They have a really talented defensive line. He'd be a really great finishing piece for them. The Vikings, potentially, I know they got only those 2 first-round picks and no other top 100 picks. So it would be tougher for them to add him. He'd be a fun fit there. Kansas City, potentially, getting Derek Nottie back, Chris Jones. He'd be a fun penetrator on that defensive line as well. I think a place where he's not pressured to be that central force and he can disrupt the one-on-one, that would be the place that would best magnify his skill set.
Okay,
Yeah.
so what do you think?
Yeah, there's a lot there that I agree with. I think I'm on a little bit more of the pessimistic side with him, where there's nothing that Ian said that I don't really disagree with at all. Like the natural leverage that he plays with, the athleticism, the twitch that he kind of has in some of that upper body stuff, even lower body. Like, he's winning with impressive moves quickly off the ball. My thing is the flashes of that. The flashes of that they were all pretty much the same. Didn't feel like there was much off of that outside of winning athletically with some of the arm over moves, quick spin moves, off the snap and things like that. I was able to see him in person at Purdue this year, be on the field right next to him. And so when I saw the 290 at his pro day, my eyebrows raised a little bit because he doesn't look like he's anything like over 270. He's very lean, and that lean frame with him if he actually is 280, what he's listed at 290. He wears it very well, and so he can keep that athleticism. So, to what Ian said there is if a D-line coach can get him to 300 pounds and still keep that athleticism, that twitch, then yeah, I think that 6'5", like a 6'5" level for us is a solid, 2-down tackle player, whether it be early rundown, passing down, third down, stuff like that. But I do think the role that Ian alluded to, where he can be somebody that's more complimentary, and where if that is a true DPR, I struggle finding, trying to look up, not necessarily a comp for him, but if that type of role is there, is if that specific role is worth, a top, first or second round pick. I don't think he's a first round player, but, as a second, day 2 pick, early day 2 pick, how often do those guys typically pan out and how, productive are they? Because if they're only playing 25 snaps a game, they can be high level snaps. So we can see that he plays with that type of motor and everything. But even at Ohio State, he was kind of coming off the field in rundown situations. And obviously you're a part of a good stable of defensive tackles there at OSU. But that was something that I feel like there's a little bit more that I need from maybe some other guys. But the pass rushing stuff, if that's there and it's the kind of the root of how he plays for the next 5-6 years, and he can keep that athleticism with gaining weight, then sure, I think he could be a high level pass rusher at the next level for sure.
Yeah, the role I think he is drafted into is going to be a big impact. How the value you get early on in his career too. He has to be the guy. That's where he might be in a role that he's not comfortable with. But switching from a player that we think may have a little higher upside or possibly a bust potential to a defensive tackle that I think is pretty unanimously one of the top 2 or 3 defensive tackles in the draft. Valentino, what do you think about Druzon Johnny Newton?
Yeah, it's kind of funny that we go from Hall to Newton in the sense of, I think Newton, and I would agree with a lot of what you guys said about Hall, like take his strengths, right? I think you could take those weaknesses and you almost flip them around into strengths in the Newton, and this is what makes him such a solid prospect for me, because he's a 3-down player. He's someone that can slide all across the defensive line. Like, if you want him to be an undersized nose on passing downs, I think he's going to wreak havoc on an offense, especially if you're going to go 4 or 5 wide on third down. I almost want to go with a speed package, and I can put Newton either as a power end, not necessarily as like a 9 technique, right? But maybe on this as like a 5, and then like you have a 9 outside of him. Really try to go speed. or you put him over the nose, because this is someone that wins and he ties both parts of his body. Really good upper body. I think that he could continue to improve his moveset, but I do think that his hands are very powerful. He does well. He can get a little lungy at times, I think, over his top, and I do think that like a well-balanced interior lineman is going to be able to take advantage of that. He opens up his chest just a little bit. I didn't see a ton of rip-throughs, but I do think that there's going to be opportunities there for blockers to kind of take advantage of Newton. It depends, right? If he shores that up, that's a big part, I think, of his repertoire that could improve. And so if he shores it up, it's going to help a lot. But he's so quick off the ball through his size and his density. And the way that he's built is advantageous for him. It helps him so much in the run game. And we've seen it in several games last year where Illinois' defense was just being basically catapulted to this next level because Newton was just destroying run fits. He was blowing up the ball as soon as it was snapped. As a pass rusher, he's getting after the quarterback doing well, or at least drawing enough attention to where his teammates could pursue the passer. And so he's one of those anchor types. And I think that he doesn't quite have that freakish athleticism. And that freakish athleticism is what would take him, I think, to that mid-first round pick to that unanimous top 10 pick. And I think both IZ and I were pretty high on Newton all year round. I think we were pretty comfortable putting him in that top 10 range. So obviously we're probably a little bit higher on him than the NFL, maybe very slightly. But I think that he is someone that, even though he doesn't necessarily have like the 6'6", 340-pound, build that some of these freaky defensive tackles that came out the last couple of years have gotten drafted very high, Jalen Carter and guys like that, Jordan Davis too. Like, he doesn't quite have that level of freakishness or density, but he's still very explosive off the ball, very quick, has great leg power, does a great job of withstanding blocks, can handle double teams very comfortably, doesn't get iced out in the run game, get blocked out too much. I think that he holds his own really well. And I think that consistency is what brings his value too. It's like, you mentioned this with Hall. Hall's a rotational guy, in my opinion, and I really like him. I think he can be a star in that league. But that might take a year or two. If it ever hits, it might take some time. If you're losing half of that rookie contract value, that's what's going to push him down a little bit. Drizon Newton, you're putting him on the field day one if you can. And there's no reason to not get him a large work share of snaps. And I think he's going to do really well. And he's almost like Patano for me, where it's like, I can feel confident playing in a big role right away without having to devote too many resources to hide his weaknesses.
Yeah, I think he's an absolute stud. One of the things I think is underrated about his game is how many snaps he just plays. One of the things about defensive tackles is they rotate in a lot more because they can't have the same stamina as a lot of the other players. And so at the next level, they're going to be well rested. But when you look at his last 2 years, he almost didn't go off the field at all. He led the Big Ten in defensive tackle snaps in 2022. And last year, he was still top 3 unless something drastically changed during the bowl season. So the fact that he is still that productive and that quick with that many snaps is only going to get better at the next level. When you reduce his snap count just a few, doesn't have to be a lot, but just a few, you're going to get those extra bursts. He's a tough player who plays with a top motor, and his size is not a massive asset compared to NFL offensive line, right? It's not the 6'6", 340 pounds you alluded to, but for what you need him to do, it's perfect. He's quick and subtle and uses hands efficiently to get around blocks. The only kind of thing I want to mention negatively is that in order to make his impacts in the run game, he has to go around the offensive line. He doesn't go through the offensive line very often. And so because of that, he's going to benefit in a slant and stunt system where he's able to kind of hit the gaps and make plays down the line. And so in order to compensate for that, you're just going to need stout linebackers behind him. But honestly, with most teams' linebacker core, that doesn't need to be anything exceptional. As long as you have players that are willing to step up and hit the run gap behind him, you're going to have a dynamic pass rushing and run defending threat right up the middle. And I think all of us have seen how impactful a pass rusher inside can be. There's a reason we talk about Aaron Donald the way we do, with Chris Jones the way we do, and any DeForest Buckner, any other defensive tackles over the last several years that had made an impact for their team because of their ability to generate pressure up the middle. Players like this don't come around very often. It's something I think teams are going to value early, and I'd be surprised if he's on the board with the 16th pick, but you never know. Byron Murphy, some teams could see him being a little higher, and having 2 defensive tackles go that high could be a tall task, but we'll see. So we've talked a lot about trench players. So let's switch a little bit to the skill position. So let's start Marshawn Lloyd out of USC. So this is a player that had a little bit of an interesting career path going from South Carolina to USC. Had a lot of success in certain roles, but not always the same level of production I think that a lot of us saw early in his career. But I see, how does he project as an NFL player?
Yeah, he's a fun player for sure. I think you look at the upside and the top end plays that he provides, and you're looking at a guy that could be a day two player, right? There's a lot of uncertainty with his profile. I think that's the biggest thing, right? 23 years old, tore his ACL early in his college career, and then also a big fumbling problem. He had 8 fumbles across his collegiate career, and at the NFL level, you look at guys like they don't get a ton of chances, right? If you fumble once or twice, you're in the doghouse. That can cut down your reps, and the running back position is notoriously volatile too. Like someone else can step in, and if they're in a good situation with good blocking, they can take that role for the long term. So it's tricky to pin down a role for him because of all that uncertainty, right? And I think his play style is very unique in that sense too, because you look at a guy who's 5'8" and change, and then over 215 pounds, right? The dude is dense. He is compact. He's got a lot of mass, but he doesn't play like you would expect. You see this bowling ball walking towards you, and you're like, oh, okay, he's going to run right through me. He's going to get underneath my pads and drive through. And he does have some power and some grading play strength to his game, but more often than not, he plays like a finesse back, right? I mean, he's explosive. He's very agile on the lateral plane. He can make guys miss, man. It's fun to watch. You know, that lateral agility, that creative freedom, that dancing ability that he has, and the lateral bursts too. You know, some guys have the quickness, but he can cover a lot of ground on his cuts too. And then he's explosive where he can get out in space. You see his upside in the receiving game as well, right? Didn't have a ton of opportunities there, but he showed a lot of upside when he did. You know, he can chip and flow into the middle of the field and catch passes beyond his frame. He can, you know, work on the seam and then get up vertical, and then he can track passes beyond his frame and make tough catches with body control. So there's a lot of upside there for sure. And I think if you can teach him to play a little more confident with that frame and that physicality, he can be a great player, because there are some times where he'll defer to that instinct to dance around and create to a fault. Like he'll have a good lane on the A gap, right? And he can commit to it and explode through and get a solid chunk of change. And he's not a small guy, so he can roll through, and he's durable, right? With the upper body, but he'll bounce outside sometimes and try to create too much, and that can cause defenders to flow in and cut off those cutback lanes. So you want to see him be more efficient with his play style and his profile, and also the uncertainty with the fumbling issue, the injury history, right? The age. Those are things that you look at and you're like, you know, do I want to spend an early round pick on this guy, a mid round pick? I think day 3, right? It's tricky because of this RB class too, right? You've got so many guys. Dylan Lobby is a fun one. Isaiah Davis, I'm a big fan of Bucky Irving, right? You know, you've got guys who are in that mid round range who could challenge for capital. But I think Marshawn Lloyd is unique because he does have that creative freedom, and he does have that density and that creating play strength, that receiving upside. All of the tools to thrive in the modern NFL are there, right? And even though he's not an elite, you know, discretion runner when it comes to choosing interior lanes, I do think there's enough there to provide a floor there. It's just, can we trust him to take care of the ball, stay healthy, and, you know, utilize his opportunities? I think all of that is there, but it's just tough. I think mid to late round, I'd say round 4, round 5 is probably the sweet spot for him. I think if you can get him in as a complementary back in rotation, he's got the receiving ability. He's not a great pass blocker. There are times when he can maintain better synergy with his feet and his hands, right? And, you know, I wouldn't quite trust him 100% in that phase either, but a receiving back with good change of pace value, with his agility and his explosiveness, I think he'd be a very good rotational threat early on. And if he can play more confident with that vision inside the tackles, I think there is a path where if he stays healthy, he can be a solid starter in the league. It's more of a boom or bust proposition, but in the middle rounds, there's not too much risk to take into account.
Yeah, I think this is one of the more difficult running back prospects to evaluate for a lot of the exact reasons you said. There is some stuff that you really like. It jumps off film. There are some measurables that are there, right? He's a compact runner who has good speed and can do a lot of stuff. He's shown physicality in the receiving game as well, but then there are huge concerns. And when you talk fumbles, like that's a massive concern. If, you know, Bill Belichick said, if you can't hang on to the ball, we can't afford to give it to you. And that's not something that's gotten better in his career, right? He was just as fumble prone this past year as he was in previous years. So that's something to be concerned about. I do think there is potential for his pass pro to be better. However, I do consider that a weakness at this point. I don't think he's a strong pass catcher. I mean, he's best used as a receiver on third downs. I think the interesting part of when you look at him compared to other running back prospects is that there just isn't a lot of, for sure, running backs in this draft, like players that you feel confident are going to come in from a day one and make an impact. So then when you're talking about that boomer bust potential, that might factor into his favor in this draft class, because the players he's kind of fighting around aren't like him at all. There are players that are much better kind of downhill runners, or maybe some better receiving threats, or kind of can do one aspect. But I think that his ability to maybe impact multiple games could give him a bump coming down the stretch, especially when you look at the fact that he's played a lot of high level competition. The ACL, while I will say is concerning from an injury history perspective, I will say I didn't see any late season deterrent from his running style, which I always appreciate. He still looked to be the same physical runner that he wants to be. He could still cut in the open space when he needed to. His testing numbers obviously show great explosiveness as well. So I do like to see that. I think he's best when he can work his way into a role that fits his strengths. I think that if he is demanded to be a day one, 250 carries a year type of player, I think he's going to struggle. But I think in the right role, especially when you pick up those little things like ball security and pass protection, he could definitely have a role in an NFL team. So last thing I want to ask you too is, we'll start with Valentino. Is there a player in this draft class that you really just want to talk about? You want to get more information out about him? Somebody that's, really gets you excited when you think about him?
Yeah, this wide receiver class we got is so good, and I got to go with Jamari Thrash. I think he's someone out of Louisville who has just been overlooked, and some of that's really understandable because he's not someone who he's not 6'4" and 220 pounds and has this Rome Odunze type or Malik Neighbors type highlight reel, but he's just really solid. He's explosive. He's a downfield threat. He's got that vertical speed. He definitely runs to his 4.3, 4.4 range type of speed. He can get over the top of corners, but he's a better route runner than I think most of these speedsters are in this class. Some of that is to do with there's not a lot of just pure speed outside of the guys that we see consistently mocked in the top 50 picks. So once you're past those top 50 picks or so, you're looking at those day three, maybe late round three. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if we see his name come off the board, just because there aren't a ton of options in his type of archetype. But I think he's a guy who can come in right away and be a number 3, number 4 receiver and be pretty productive. I don't expect him to ever be too much more than that. But when you look at guys like KJ Osborne, I'm not saying that play-wise or body-wise or anything like that, but just the production level. Come in, 600 yards, that type of production, provide some explosive plays. You're looking for a handful of games a year where this player was just kind of unstoppable, like on a low level of targets. And I think that Thrash has that ability. I do think that he's a player that he definitely would go to the Senior Bowl, and when he performed well there, just kind of checked another box, right? Like, he did well in the one-on-one drills. You see all the traits, you see the skills. He's more refined than what I think he's been sold. It was maybe just in an offense that didn't, or had the capabilities, wasn't able to, or whatever, didn't want to, maybe, who knows. But I don't know that they necessarily maximized his skills, and I think that he will be someone that we look back upon and say, wait, who was drafted above that guy? Like, is he going to make a Pro Bowl? Probably not, but he's going to be a role player, I think, for a long time. And when you see the value of that 3rd, 4th, 5th round range, which is where we've consistently put him, I think that's probably just too low for a guy that's a good contributor.
I like it. Yeah, he's definitely somebody that's kind of started to sneak on some draft boards, I think, recently. So it provides some good validation. All right, I see. How about you?
Yeah, I'm going to stick with the running back here and go with Blake Watson from Memphis. He's been one of my big-time sleepers throughout the class. In fact, if IVU remembers, I'm sure he does. When we were at PFN, I probably mentioned him a couple times because I watched him at first at Old Dominion when he was there, and I think it was a 2018 commit. So he's been in college for a while. He's going to be an older prospect, but I think right away he can provide a role for you in an RB rotation. I think you're working with a guy who is around, I want to say 5'9.5", 200 pounds. So, really lean mass, really compact runner who I think has size-defying contact balance. But There was a year earlier in his career where he caught over 60 passes. He's got that versatility to be a really, really impactful player in the passing game. And, looking at his route tree, I really love the stem work that he provides. He can test DB angles ahead of stems, really good sharp hit flexibility and angle freedom on those stems. Full route tree on day one as a route runner and a receiving threat. And he's got the rack ability too with that short area direction changes, that agility, really fluid runner as well. And when he gets carries behind the line of scrimmage, right? He doesn't quite have the mass that other guys in this class have, but I think Blake Watson has a legitimate argument to be one of the most patient runners in this class. I think he's always very efficient behind the line of scrimmage. He never overcommits to the wrong lane. He's very comfortable when he has to wait for the right lane to open up, right? But he's decisive too. He doesn't wait too long. Very good mix of patience and decisiveness that allows him to be so efficient as a runner. I just look at the complete palette of tools, right? The modern NFL, if you don't have a volume back, an elite volume back, it's very tough to find. So I think the modern NFL is trending more towards, we were talking about Marshawn Lloyd toward the tail end of that discussion, right? He's probably not going to be a 200 carry guy, but if you can get a confined role for him where he can excel, that's good enough for your team. And I look at Blake Watson with his receiving utility, with his vision and his athleticism too. I don't think he plays up to these numbers all the time on tape. I think his savvy and his vision and his control as a runner is what makes him so unique. But he ran a 4.4, jumped 41.5 inches, 11.3 broad jump at his pro day. That's very good at testing athleticism. And then you turn to the field, the control and the nuance that he plays with is so impressive to me. Patient runner, fluid runner, really smooth hip flexibility, but then also physical finisher who can use the mass that he has to finish forward and get inside guys' frames. So every box that I think to check, aside from size, I think Blake Watson has it. And I think he'll be an older guy, and that might push him down the board a little bit. But day 3, I would be all over this guy. And if you can feature him as a receiver and a change of pace runner, you're getting phenomenal value in the RB room.
Yeah, I don't sell me on Blake Watson. I'm definitely there with you. All right, Jordan, last one.
Yeah, so this is somebody I really haven't heard a lot of people talk about him. Is Cedric Johnson, the edge from Ole Miss. He's somebody that didn't really know much about before finalizing him for our draft site here. But first couple plays that you see him against Alabama, you see that explosive first step. And I think I remember messaging you and Nathan Cooper. I said this guy's gonna have like one of the better 40-yard dash times just simply off of that. And so had one of the best broad jumps, vertical jumps at the combine for edges and stuff like that. So he's got that explosive first step that you want in an edge rusher. Didn't have a lot of production, over the last couple of years. He was used more as almost as a DPR at Ole Miss, but I do think that is the type of role that he could have as a backup mostly. So I think he could be a part of a good rotation on the front. Plays with a high motor. His hand use is tight and compact to his frame. As well. And so I think that's something that can get worked up on. He's not the bendiest, most flexible guy off the edge. However, I do think that the explosive first step is a really good trait to kind of work off of, especially as a day 3 pick, somebody that you can develop down the line.
Nice, I like it. All right, well, that's all I have for you two. So I want to appreciate you taking the time, Ian Cummings and Ian Valentino, for joining us today. We're going to kick it over to Travis May now, and we will continue our conversation on draft prospects. All right, we'd like to welcome in Travis May now to join us to talk about prospects. So Travis May is a college football managing editor for A2Z Sports and has been covering college football, the NFL, NFL draft, and fantasy football since 2015. He hosts the College to Canton podcast on RotoViz Radio, and you can follow him on his Twitter, as you can see on the screen, FF_Travis M. So Travis, thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here and talk some prospects. I can't believe the NFL draft is like right here, right around the corner. It's just already right in our face. And it seems as soon as we start writing and talking about these prospects, the draft week is already here. So glad to dive into it with a couple of key players and early round players and one maybe mid-round prospect or so, hopefully with you guys today.
Good. Yeah, so your whole year comes down to 1 week and then it's over and you just have to start immediately again. So It's kind of like Christmas morning for anybody that works in the industry. It's great, but it is, there's a little bit of bittersweet when it comes. But the first player we want to talk about is somebody that's kind of been a little polarizing throughout his career, depending on which side you're on. But talking about J.J. McCarthy out of Michigan. So, Travis, what do you think about him? What do you think, might be his strengths and where he might go on draft day?
Sure. He's somebody that I'm kind of just to kind of frame things. I love film and analysis, but I also kind of have an analytics background. So I love to view things through a meaningful data perspective as well. And so with JJ, a lot of people want to talk about his lack of, really fantastic raw volume stats. But when you break his game down and his down-to-down success rates across the board, whether it's third down rates, first down rates, whether we're talking about scheme adjustments that account for things like play action percentage or motion, and adjust his profile to give us a better perspective as to where passing success comes from. Even basic things like EPA per play, his overall QBR, passer rating. If you look at his overall efficiency profile, by every measure last year, a meaningful measure that is, into translating to NFL success, he was a top 10 quarterback in the country, if not top 5, by many measures. And I don't think a lot of people think that or know that, but it's just objectively the case. And I talked to him about his kind of down-to-down success and kind of his good decision-making, consistent, good, like down-to-down decision-making and like what goes into that. And it was interesting to just hear him break down kind of what goes into, I guess, making the right read on every single play and just understanding what each play call is, what based on the play call, what your offensive coordinator, what your coaching staff is implying that they want you to do on any given play. And I think he's just a really intelligent guy that understands what's required of him on any given situation, in any given play that he's asked to make. So if it's, a tough like third read on the backside of like across the field, he can make that. If he needs to make the check down because there's pressure, he just takes it. Whatever the defense gives him, when you watch him play, he consistently takes that. If he needs to make a tough play up the seam to Colston Loveland, who's actually covered, finding faith that, he's going to turn around and be on the same page, he does that too. So I think you're not going to, when you check the stat sheet, be super impressed. And you're not going to have a 70-yard throw downfield with J.J. McCarthy. But he has requisite traits. He has requisite mobility when it comes to just keeping the chains moving and keeping the offense on schedule and exceeding expectations. He just does that really well. So it's no surprise to me that I guess around the beginning of February, after Senior Bowl happened and, Bo Nix and Michael Penix didn't really impress that week, people started realizing maybe there is a clear quarterback 4, and now he's in the mix for quarterback 2. So but for some people, so it's just great to see that ascension, people to kind of come around on a player who has a special data profile, which I appreciate, but also just seems like a really smart, great guy.
Yeah. I struggle some with I do agree with a lot with what Travis said. He does seem like the kind of guy that can progress through reads and stuff like that. I thought he did really well this year on some of those third down plays and stuff like that, where maybe not necessarily working through the progression, but knowing the matchup that you have that you can exploit. Especially a lot of times that teams will play man coverage against them, and they would try and match up rather than playing zone on the back end. And he was able to just put it on his receivers when he needed to, and things like that. And so I do think that some of that stuff is good. I don't necessarily buy into a lot of the great decision making just simply because of some of the things that he got away with. And there were some things that luck is a factor in it as well. And some guys are just lucky than others. And so, you don't want to take that away from him. The athleticism is there to do it. And if he didn't have something like that kind of backed up the reasoning why he would do something like that, then it's okay to get away with, I think. But there are definitely some things there that I want to hone back in. Obviously the first play of the Rose Bowl, that was a big thing where it could have swung the game in a completely different direction, and it almost did. That's something I want to bring back. There was another play in the Rose Bowl where he's rolling out to his right, throws across his body back towards the middle of the field. The receiver makes a great catch, kind of fingertip catch over the middle. That's not something that you want to see, on a down-to-down basis, especially at the NFL level. So, but I do think that there are obviously great things about what he does, and that's just being the true leader of an offense, being kind of the point guard, so less, for lack of better words, stuff like that. So being able to make the right decision and things like that. the thing that I struggle with him is necessarily to a guy like whether it be Daniels or May, some of those guys that he's in competition with for that QB2 spot. It's just kind of the natural, not creation because he can't create, but it's just that there's a slight kind of it factor that Daniels has is getting stuff out, getting out of something that's kind of crazy. Same thing with May, and that May does it more with his arm rather than his legs most of the time, even though he's a good athlete. Some of the awkward throws, being able to throw off the back of one foot, having the natural arm strength to do that. Whereas a lot of the times that you see it with McCarthy is he's having to plant his back foot and he's driving the ball down the middle of the field. And so I think that some of that arm strength is kind of watered down a little bit. Where I think he has a good arm. I don't think he has when it comes to arm talent and strength. I don't necessarily know if he has what May has, what even Williams has. I don't even necessarily think that Daniels has, the best arm talent or anything. So those are the kind of things that I struggle with him for. I do think there is potential to become, a borderline top 10 quarterback. I feel like he's going to fall into the Kirk Cousins, Jared Goff, all those types of roles where every once in a while, every few years or so, they're going to have a year where they put up massive numbers. Maybe it might be a product of the system that they are in. I think we'll talk about some of that stuff here soon. But I didn't necessarily see somebody that if I'm taking them with the second or third pick in the draft, or if I'm trading up multiple assets for, there wasn't somebody that I would think, okay, this is a true difference maker, game changer for what my offense needs to be in the NFL.
Yeah, that's a fair take, and it's interesting you mentioned Kirk Cousins and Jared Goff, two guys that they can move a little bit, but they're never going to really add a whole lot of value on the ground. And I think honestly, that kind of profile is probably spot on. Like that's the range of where I kind of see McCarthy fitting. I don't think he's ever going to be the Patrick Mahomes, like nobody is. But no, I don't think he's even going to be that. Hey, he could be in the top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL right now. I don't necessarily project that. But I think there's real value in having somebody. I know that fans like Vikings fans and Rams fans or Lions fans, whoever might be mad that Goff or Kirk Cousins couldn't get them all the way there. But there's real value in having a quarterback that good that can execute the offense and be a long-term starter. Like Cousins was the 2012 draft, and he's still chucking it. I mean, like he never had those elite traits, but he was just really efficient, really solid decision maker in general. Like Goff's profile suggested he was the best quarterback that year, but I had questions about his mobility. He didn't really ever use that, but he's still been serviceable. I think that there's real value in having a player like that that can win you games. So I don't project. I think we're kind of on the same page, and I'm not really disagreeing. I think that I think that a quarterback like that though in today's NFL goes somewhere in the early first anyway, because teams absolutely need that. And the Vikings, they just lost their Kirk Cousins. They need their new Kirk Cousins. So there's been buzz. He's been the betting favorite off and on to the Vikings since I think the second week of February. At the time, it was like, hey, maybe they get him at 11, or maybe they trade back. And now it's like the midpoint for his draft cap value or whatever, according to the sports books, is like pick 5. And but also at the same time, the Vikings are still the odds-on favorite to get him, so the trade-up is already implied. And so it seems like that's the chalk landing spot.
So like you said with the Vikings, I know Jeff's the Mike guy. We'll get his take on that, but I think him being in Minnesota makes sense for some of the things that we said, where if he has that kind of stability with the head coach, the system, you've got Justin Jefferson there as well. You got TJ Hawkinson, people that you can rely on to be able to help him bridge that next year or two that he's going to be coming into the NFL from college. I think is great. I think Atlanta would have been a good spot if they were still in the need for a quarterback as well. It would be at the 8th pick. I think two places that kind of terrify me a little bit for him would be a Denver or a Las Vegas, where they don't necessarily have that. Where I would trust Sean Payton with a rookie quarterback and being able to bring him along. And if it's somebody that he really likes and wants to invest in, I think that it could be a good thing. However, some of the things that those offenses have, but some of the holes, whether it be a receiver, a line, just support system and stuff, I struggle seeing him being able to elevate those types of guys, especially in the first couple of years where it would be rough. And if somebody like that is moving up to trade up for him, then you're hindering yourself from even doing that further down the line. You're giving up assets and capital over the next years, where Minnesota does have that. And because they have some of that already in place on offense, I think you can get away with it if they were to be the ones that were to come up for him. It's just, trading up in the top 5 or somebody like that, you would really have to have so much conviction on them to be able to do that.
Yeah, and what do you think about the Giants? Because that's been my buddy Kent made this great tool that tracks basically 100% of all the official pre-draft visits dating back to like 2015, and the Giants they've visited with like 15. I guess not 15 different quarterbacks, but like at this point they have 15 like formal, not just like asking, hey, what's up at the combine, like formal private interviews, workout, things like that with quarterbacks this cycle. And as much as Joe Shane has been lying through his teeth that they're not interested in a quarterback, they clearly are.
Yeah.
They don't have really the wide receivers there either. Would you be concerned with McCarthy there too?
Yeah, it would be something where if you're drafting him, at 6 or whether you trade up for him, you're kind of thinking that he's going to start. And obviously then Daniel Jones, maybe it's all play. They're trying to force the hand of other people so they can get somebody that they want to come back down to where they are at 6. They obviously need a quarterback, but they would fall into that same bucket with, Vegas and Denver where, okay, do I have the support system in place? I think I trust Dable to an extent to be able to do that. But when we've seen him elevate quarterbacks, he had Josh Allen, and he's one of the best quarterbacks in the league. And so I think Daniel Jones in 2022 had a good season where you thought that maybe that contract might have been warranted to an extent just because you have to pay a market value for a starting quarterback. But that would be something that I don't necessarily know what I would like. And maybe they're just doing all this quarterback stuff because, maybe they end up taking one at some point, whether it be on day 2 or day 3, because they need to figure out the, a succession plan if Daniel Jones isn't working out anymore. But yeah, that would be something that I would be really puzzled at, on draft night if they were to sit at 6 or trade up to 4 or something like that for a quarterback, knowing what they kind of have on offense.
Yeah, I think JJ McCarthy has had a lot of luxuries in college that has gotten to where he is, and not be that's a crutch at anything, but it's something that when you have an offensive line that is one of the best in the country, you've got receivers, tight ends, running backs that can make plays, and one of the best defense in the country, you can just be yourself and be comfortable. And I think that's where JJ McCarthy's strength has come from this last year, is that he was allowed to operate exactly the type of quarterback he is. Now, if you put him somewhere, let's say Minnesota, they have the skill position players to make him better. They've got 2 bookend tackles, but their entire interior offensive line is replaceable players at best. And their defense is just going to still be a sit on the edge. I love the defensive scheme because it masks a lot of the issues they have, but it is not perfect, especially when they win. So my problem is if JJ McCarthy you have to trade up for him, so you lose draft capital, and you need him to throw 35 times a game, is he going to still provide the same value? I think JJ McCarthy in a perfect system is a player like Kirk Cousins that you're okay rolling out on a down-to-down basis, on a week-to-week basis. But I think if you need him to step up and make big plays every single week, that's where I have concerns, especially really in his career where confidence is just going to be so critical for him. And then on top of that, if you have to trade a first-round pick next year too, and you're down even more draft capital, then it's really a crapshoot. I think if he falls to the Vikings at 11, it's a lot more comfortable situation than if they have to trade up and get him. But I think that there's significant potential in a quarterback like that. I also think there's significant risk if he's asked to not be who he is. So that's what I thought. Personally, I would rather wait on a quarterback until next year and build up your farm system as you would for this year. But I understand that that's not always a realistic option. The GM is on the hot seat if he can't perform. And with already so many other holes in their team, I think that this is kind of the biggest, most glaring one, at least on the offense. I think the rest of their offense can survive if they get a competent quarterback. But switching over to dynamic receiving options, Xavier Worthy set the combine record for fastest 40 time. What do you think he does at the next level? What do you like about him, Travis? What do you think maybe he needs to work on?
I think Xavier Worthy is somebody I've really been rather high on for quite some time, dating back to this spring before he actually entered college. I'm in some pretty nerdy fantasy football leagues, and so you draft freshmen for your college fantasy stuff. And I was excited about his transfer to Texas because he was a high pedigree guy with just wild speed, way faster than even his verified track times would suggest, even coming into college. But at the time, in spring, ahead of his college career, he was actually committed to Michigan. But I believe it was in April that he actually flipped, and it was going to be changing and going to Texas. And then I was like, okay, if this dude gets unleashed in this scheme in a vertical kind of route tree immediately, he could not only explode in year one, but become a really dynamic playmaker throughout his entire college career. And of course, that summer he was already getting hyped up by everyone on his team, and before the games even began. And then once the games actually started, he just was kind of unstoppable. Had on nearly 1,000 yards as a true freshman. One of the most impressive like adjusted kind of metrics, production profile seasons we've ever seen for a wide receiver. Coming in and immediately having over 30% of the offense to yourself is not really heard of. And so he kind of cleared every meaningful production profile kind of threshold that you like to see to suggest a player might hit the next level in his first year. And it was funny. I talked to some NFL analytics staffers in my previous job working at Mojo's. We were building the sports stock market. And we were talking about different production variables, different aspects of profiles, athletic profiles, on-field measured athleticism. And when we were talking about on-field measured athleticism, like acceleration, deceleration, in and out of breaks, vertical, like speed, like straight line speed, the first player that was asked about by multiple staffers that I talked to, in both cases, didn't even talk to each other, was Xavier Worthy. And this was back when he was maybe a sophomore. The early sophomore season, and they're like, hey, I know this guy's not draft eligible this year, but what's up with this guy? And so, like, even 2 years ago, I think people in NFL on NFL staffs knew he was a special athlete, and not just like straight line speed, but like every facet of on-field athletic composite. Whenever you want to build a special player that could run routes really well, find success at all levels of the field, whether you take a screen and turn that into an 80-yard play, or you burn somebody downfield and have late hands and wow in some other way. So I just really been a fan of Xavier Worthy's game for years now. And so to see him kill the combine like he did and be there in person, like 20 yards from the finish line, he hear the crowd erupt when he broke the record. Just an incredible moment to see that come to fruition for him. So I'm pumped. And I'm pretty confident he's going to be an even earlier draft pick than I think Chalk would suggest right now. I think most people think late first round. I think there's a great chance he doesn't even make it past like pick 20-ish or so. I know that I personally know there are teams that are considering him in that range right now. So I hope that he wows and is a surprise, quote unquote, riser on draft night, because that would be really fun.
Yeah, I remember watching him as a true freshman against Oklahoma, I think, and I watched that game. I was trying for our company and tracking the stats, and immediately I'm like, this guy's he's exactly who you want him to be. He was so good in that game. My problem.
You remember that diving, like he was like completely horizontal to the ground. He's like 18-year-old freshman, lays out after burning the corner on. The play I'm talking about. It's like, what in the world? And like he's moving so fast. He dives, catches the ball, bounces off the ground, and like goes another 5 or 10 yards because he was just flying so fast, but still holds on to the ball.
He has some incredible potential. My problems with him are more along the lines of consistency. I agree, the speed is there for sure. I am not worried about that. His vertical ability, his highlight plays are all there, but he had so many concentration drops this last year. When the plate broke down, he was not there on the first read. I don't think he had the route savvy to work through a zone coverage to get open for his quarterback. He's going to offer, obviously it's a minor thing, but things like blocking, right? He doesn't have blocking. I don't think he showed the effort on route running when he knew he wasn't going to get the ball. It is all those other little things that just give me massive pause. I don't look at a lot of the top receivers that today in the NFL, and they don't do the little things. I think the players that have immense talent and can't do that scare me. I would love him on my team as a third option where he can be given a lot of one-on-one opportunities. You can use him in the screen game or can kind of create openings for him down the field too. But I think if you are asking him to be the dynamic, number one receiver right off the bat, he's going to be facing bigger physical and faster cornerbacks than he saw in college. And I don't think he's going to be able to step up to the level that he is expected to if he is taken that highly. That's my biggest concern with him. I think that 3 years down the road, this is either going to be a player that we're like, wow, why was this not a top 10 pick? Or we're going to look at it and be like, why was this player a top 100 pick? I don't think there's a lot of in between. I think he's a massive boom or bust prospect. I think if he gets put in the right role and teams can just take some pressure off him, could develop into a phenomenal player, but I don't see that being a 2-year process. I see him really maximizing 3 to 4 years down the road.
Curious. So with your experience, I know you guys do a lot of charting, and so were you actually working his BYU game by chance?
His BYU game, I was not.
Okay, because that was the one game when I'm like, dude, there were actually a few instances. I know what you're talking about. Outside of that, the rest of the year, like maybe there were 2 other instances. The one I can remember against TCU. I think that all I watch for my previous job. I was basically watching every game. Yeah, and so I'm pretty sure the BYU one was rough. The TCU, I can think of one play, but outside of that, like a lot of if you want to make a drops reel or whatever for him, it was when he was fighting through a broken hand like 2 years ago. And so for me, I know that he had some concentration drops as he was trying to reteach himself how to catch the freaking ball because he had a broken hand. But most of that came 2 seasons ago, and I guess in the BYU game last year. But outside of that, for the most part, I didn't see that come up a whole lot in his game. And I think anybody that has the speed that he does and is at the size that he is, I think automatically can be perceived as like a boom bust type play. But he's just way more complete than most players with his physical profile, I believe.
Oh, yeah. Like, for being, 165 pounds or something, his physicality after the catch, no concerns with that. He is tough to bring down after the catch. He'll break a lot of tackles, not just make people miss. I will say a lot of our metrics do not highlight him well, which is also another, just another concern. It's one aspect, it's one angle, but he does not compare well with a lot of our, he ranks dead last in our 44 receiver ranks that are eligible for this draft and a couple big statistics. So it's just, again, it's one aspect. It doesn't mean a lot, but it is a little concerning when you see somebody that has so much potential, but did not always do the little things. So again, I'm not surprised.
What metrics are you?
So our total points rating, our total points rating per game, he is 44th. That is also the same ranking he has for total points rating overall, which is, basically what you do compared to everybody else that's expected at your position. He is 33rd out of 44 L draft receivers we have on our site in catchable percentage, caught 82% of catchable balls, which might sound high, but in reality, it's not as high as we'd like to see. His target share, plus minus, kind of the expected target share we'd expect him to see was quite a bit lower than we did. So, again, I think that there is a lot of things he could be, but it's not, I don't think it's anywhere near a slam dunk. I am not sold on speed alone. I think that for me, hands, route running, and being able to separate at the line of scrimmage against press are going to be some of the things that I want to consistently see. If he could do those, great. I am absolutely rooting for him as a player. I would love him on the Vikings or any other team that drafts him. He just needs to be put in the right situation. But so the last thing I want to ask you, Travis, we talked about a couple players that I think a lot of us have buzz about and, could feel confident that they're at least, top 100 players, we'll call it there. I think very likely first rounders, but we'll call them top 100 for sure. Is there a player that you really like and want people to know more about?
This is another player that's definitely top 100 for sure, but I'm not sure where he goes. I think there's a lot of disagreement as to where he might go. Because people don't know what to do with this running back class. There's not a Bijan Robinson. There's not a Jahmyr Gibbs. There's not that automatic slam dunk first round profile anywhere. And many people's, assumed running back one, if he were healthy, is Jonathan Brooks, and he's not healthy right now. So one of my favorite running backs though this year that I think people need to understand probably is the running back one is Trey Benson. when it comes down to his running back efficiency, like rushing efficiency from the 2022 season, you guys probably have some of this too. But like he's kind of off the charts. Whether you want to talk about his yards like after contact per attempt, or his breakaway run rate, his on-field athleticism. I don't have full access to like the full library of what he's done, but his peak miles per hour and average miles per hour, like once he's actually beyond like 5 yards from the line of scrimmage, is kind of absurd. And so he has all the requisite traits to hit at the next level. He wasn't the most consistent this past season because people were just kind of adjusting for the expectation with him. It was like, okay, Trey Benson's going to get the carry. Maybe we should probably adjust at this point. But even so, he had one of the highest breakaway and explosive run rates this year and was really impressive. Has all the features, size you want to have. And then he had, a great NFL combine, proving that he had great size adjusted speed metrics and burst and all the things that you love to see at the running back position. And it was funny when I was talking to him at the combine, he was joking because I was asking like, hey, what makes you able to kind of break away on these runs and whatnot and just, get to the second level. And he was just joking. It's like, man, I just run. My teammates call me Forrest Gump because they just, I just run. I get to the edge. I beat somebody because they underestimate my speed. Because, he's like almost 220 pounds. As someone he kind of played at, he says around 220. And so I think people just underestimate how explosive he is and how powerful he is when he gets his hand on you. And so he's just a really fun player to watch who has even better explosive receiving ability than I think his profile would suggest, given what he did with the opportunities that he was given as a receiver. So I think he's a home run threat on any down, and in my opinion, should be a second round pick. So if he drops to the third, okay, but I think in many ways, through many lenses, he should be the running back one this year.
Yeah, and that's we also had him as our RB1 as well. We're big fans over here. It's just one of those years where running backs there's not that elite level running back, I don't think, or at least a slam dunk that people like to see at the top. And so we could see a slide, or again, in years like that, sometimes you get a kind of a bunch go back to back because teams don't want to slip too far before it gets out of their hands. But yeah, I definitely agree. I think Trey Benson is gonna be a starter at the next level, and I think teams are gonna be whoever gets him is gonna be pleasantly surprised with what he can do with the ball. But I want to appreciate your time today. I know it takes a lot to come on these, so thanks to you and Ian Cummings and Ian Valentino as well. For Jordan Edwards, myself, Jeff Dean, want to thank you for listening to the Scout's Eye presented by Sports Info Solutions.